Which of the killers have actually defied the entity in some way? We've talked a lot over the years about the relationship between the killers and the entity, but which of the killers have actually stood up to it in some way, or been defiant? Let's take a look today. Trapper has most definitely been defiant in the past, and is debatably the best example of a defiant killer. He's known to have directly fought back against the entity and its literal claws. This is also theorized to be the reason why he has the hooks piercing his skin, a punishment for his defiance, or possibly even a sign that he was once on the other side of the trials, as a survivor, and was tortured into being a killer. The entity likely encourages this form of rebellion though, with Trapper being raised by a cruel and manipulative father, who often got Evan to do terrible things. The entity has essentially replicated that relationship between itself and Evan, all in the name of creating more emotion for it to feed on. So whilst he is defiant, the entity likely doesn't mind it, which is a trend you'll see quite often. Wraith is a character who throughout his lore does not seem to ever defy the entity and actually gives into it. When it takes hold of his heart when he is young, he gives into it and ends up killing some soldiers. The same happens again when he's older and works at Autohaven Wreckers, killing his evil boss Azarov. Both times Philip reluctantly gave in, and now in the realm he appears very empty and hollow. Therefore, whilst he doesn't like it here I think, he also doesn't seem to be defiant, a possible sign that he is resigned to the fact that the entity will win no matter what he does. So it's best to just give in. His add-ons seem to reflect this too, with one of his Eries being a notation that the entity is always watching over us. He knows. The one small defiant aspect may be that he gives survivors some leeway on occasion, letting them go. It's even theorized that he rings his bell specifically to warn the survivors first of his approach, which I suppose is somewhat defiant if true. Billy actually shows no signs of defiance really, and instead appears to be very loyal, with him even engraving the entity's claws into his chainsaw, this seemingly showing off his favour for the clawed beast in the sky, likely because it rewarded Billy with freedom and agency, a thing he never had growing up. Nurse also doesn't appear too defiant, but for a similar reason to Wraith, she seems incredibly broken and unable to potentially fight back at all. She's in a unique spot where she's only alive because of the entity. Her current twisted form, where she's barely held together and struggles to breathe, only exists because of the entity's reparations. Therefore, she doesn't have much choice if she wishes to live on. We do see her regret, however, to some level, during her Mori, with her careful closing of the survivor's eyes. But this I would argue isn't really defiance, at least not overtly. Myers has often been noted as defiant to the entity due to his original ability to Mori survivors at any given moment with use of his tombstone add-ons, this being theorized as a defiant act as he cuts the trials short. This is debatable but not entirely impossible I think. Cutting trials short doesn't appear to displease the entity, so this would track. It's also never noted in the lore how Myers got into the realm. This has led to many theories that Myers actually just wandered in one day. Therefore it's highly likely that he is being defiant, even if he doesn't know it. This is also only amplified now with Myers being removed from the realm, suggesting he may have decided to just walk out just as he walked in. Whether this free agency is allowed by the entity though is debatable. Myers is powerful, but he is just a guy after all, and the entity could surely control him more if it wished to. Hag is another character who appears so broken and twisted from her original self that she likely isn't defiant really. Prior to the realm, she was on the brink of death when she reaches out to the entity through hex magic, which saves her, but transforms her into the Hag. She now does not seem to have humanity left within, at least from what we can see of her in trial. I would say now she's simply a loyal servant. She seems very much animalistic nowadays. Doctor is a tough one to pin down, but I'd say he probably is decently defiant, even if he does enjoy the realm. It's highly likely that the headgear he has on is the entity's doing. I mean, who else put it there? He certainly didn't have it on before the realm either, so this was likely a controlling measure, due to possibly underestimating how crazy with power Doctor would go after receiving his inexhaustible spark. Other than this, there's not much else to be fair. It does seem like the entity does more for Doctor to placate him than others though, like giving him a submarine filled with 100 survivors to experiment on. That kind of thing. So possibly the reason he isn't defiant is because the entity works overtime to make sure he isn't. Huntress grew up essentially in the wild, so it's understandable she's a little defiant and uncontrollable, as she always went by her own rules, and now suddenly she's told to follow some creepy spider god in the sky. Her defiance seems to surround her killing specifically, with her perk Beast of Prey noting that when her lust for a kill is too intense, she actually cuts off her connection with the entity, which is surely a defiant act to some level. I'm assuming as it's momentarily though and happens only in fairly controlled instances that it's not such a big deal. Other than this, she doesn't seem particularly defiant. Bubba has potentially been slightly defiant toward the entity, with him being punished and straight up attacked by its claws before, leaving large gashes across the body of his chainsaw. This is likely more of a fear tactic on the entity's part though, as Bubba originally served his family out of fear. The entity seems to employ the same tactic, as when Bubba enters the realm, it imposes a dark feeling over him, more horrific than anything he'd felt before. This paired with direct attacks could suggest it wasn't rebellion that got him these, but instead a deep understanding from the entity of what it needed to do to manipulate Bubba. Freddy's relationship with the entity does seem complicated, as the entity most definitely nerfed him quite considerably when coming to the realm. However, it's also noted that Freddy is kind of cool with it, as he sees the potential in all of the new people to torment. Therefore, I would say he's probably just another simple case of not really being defiant. He gets eternal access to victims, and does retain some control still with a partial dream world, so I think he just isn't defiant really. Pig is another case of simply seeming pretty content where she is and actually very motivated to obey, as she believes the entity is all a part of Jigsaw's plan still, with the entity appearing to Amanda as Billy the puppet. After failing him and getting shot, she now wants to make sure she obeys the entity to the best of her ability, and so doesn't really show signs of defiance. Whilst her reverse bear traps do circumvent the hooks, I'd say this isn't defiant really, as the turmoil and panic that would go through a survivor wearing one is surely producing enough emotion to please the entity, especially as the bear traps very rarely go off. Clown is, I reckon, another case of being content, and he doesn't show signs of defiance either. He's a lazy, sloppy guy, and one of the issues in the real world he had was getting caught. Here in the realm that can't happen, so there's not really any reason to rebel or be defiant. The entity also did him a solid by repairing Maurice after he was burned entering the realm. This suggests overall a pretty mutual understanding and lack of defiance when it comes to Clown. Spirit may seem like she would be more defiant, but I'd argue she probably isn't, because she's been so badly manipulated by the entity that she likely doesn't even perceive reality the same way we see it. She likely is having her vision manipulated to see the survivors as her father. We can see her inner torment through her facial expression, where she goes from angry to horrified in seconds. Therefore, it's unlikely she really has the capacity to be defiant. She seems rarely present as herself before the anger returns. She doesn't have time to be angry with the entity because she's so consumed by rage for her father, and then trauma or upset as well. And similar to Nurse, she also relies on the entity to live at all. The entity saved her from death. Legion as a group basically want to be here in the realm, aside maybe Joey. The four of them basically dreamt of becoming serial killers to the level of those they idolized, and therefore they're probably having a blast here, even if they're not seeing the bigger picture quite yet. Ultimately, they're not going to be defiant because they don't want to be. It could also be out of fear though, with some add-ons suggesting a sort of looming threat presented by the entity. The eerie pin, for example, being a visualization of the control it has over them. They're just regular teenagers at the end of the day, so they're in a bit too deep. Plague is another character who doesn't want to be defiant. She's literally in the realm of her god. She wants to serve it in the way it sees fit and do as commanded. Therefore, I think she's simply not defiant. She does as she's told, as she wants to save her people. Ghostface is well known as being one of the entity's favorite killers, as he was given the gift of the floaty tassels on his outfit. Ghostface does seem to enjoy it here too, and there are some cosmetic entries that suggest Ghosty even chose to come here, and wasn't just taken. I do think Ghosty is a bit defiant here and there though, and likely would mess with the rules and the survivors more often than other killers. It's just speculation really, to be fair, but that's the impression I get from his personality. Demogorgon doesn't seem defiant at all really, at least there's nothing to suggest it. It did get removed back in 2021, but it also returned in 2023. The in-law theory being that a deal was struck with either Vecna or the Mind Flayer, but not defiant really, I reckon. Also, that's more defiance from Vecna or the Mind Flayer, isn't it? So Oni also doesn't seem particularly defiant, as he's too angry to be, I think. He doesn't see the bigger picture or see the entity as the true evil here. He just wants to take his anger out on the survivors. The entity does seem to toy with him as well by placing the Oni mask onto him, something he wouldn't wear willingly. This suggests a definite tension between the two, but a working relationship nonetheless. Maybe it's because Kazan is somewhat accepting that he is a monster at this point. He does believe it to some degree, even if he sees it as an insult. It's possible Oni's anger may sometimes lead him to break the trial rules though, or kill survivors preemptively. However, that's pure speculation to be fair. Deathslinger also doesn't seem particularly defiant, and like some others I've mentioned here before, it's probably because he sees the survivors differently. We actually get a clear excerpt of this in the lore too, where it mentions that he sees the survivors as people who had wronged him in the past, such as Henry Bayshaw or the Warden. This being the reason for his glowing white eyes. I could see him potentially hesitating to kill survivors if he knew the truth, but he probably doesn't, so I doubt Deathslinger is that defiant or rebellious. Much like Oni, his anger is greater than anything else. Pyramid Head straight up made a deal with the entity to come here, and so I think whilst he is quite defiant in his actions, basically making up his own rules for the trials, I don't think the entity minds this defiance. I think this is the type of defiance it encourages, as it causes plenty of emotion in and of itself, the new form of hooking being cages, and Pyramid Head's ability to bypass certain survivor perks like DS makes him a unique threat to them. The only thing I could see being genuinely painful to the entity is how Pyramid Head directly carves his blade into the trial grounds, which is the entity ultimately. But hey, maybe this was part of the agreement terms. Maybe the entity's into that too. I don't know. Who knows? Well, who knows? Blight is most definitely defiant, and debatably the most defiant out of any of the killers, as he sort of forced his way into the realm by annoying the entity, and then when it tried to get rid of him, he turned up again. First, he carved his way into the realm by summoning the entity with symbols and blood magic, seemingly. Then when he was tossed to the void, he utilized the blighted serum to escape it and explore the wider realm. It's only here where the entity decided to place him into the trials as a killer, placating him with vials of the serum he had become addicted to. Even here, Blight still seemingly goes rogue, capturing killers and injecting them with the serum, leading to many of them becoming distorted or even powered up by it, becoming possible threats to some level, as the Blight appears to be a dangerous substance to the entity, infesting its realm yearly around Halloween. There's also plenty of little things that hint toward their relationship, like the eerie Blight tag making jest of Blight's defiance. So the entity sees how defiant he is, but it sort of makes a joke out of it almost, thinks like, oh, this is nothing. Twins, I think, are probably some of the least defiant characters, and largely because the only reason Charlotte's here at all is because the entity recreated her brother and saved her life. There's no reason for her to be defiant, really. I could see her sparing a survivor every now and then though, but not to the detriment of herself, I imagine. Trickster is another killer that does not seem defiant in the slightest, as he simply enjoys the realm and what it has to offer him, with eternal victims and fans even for him to impose himself upon. He seems to have a good relationship with the entity too, where it boosts his ego and placates his desires. Nemesis is literally a programmed BOW, so it's debatable whether he has any thoughts or feelings toward the entity, or whether any form of defiance would be anything more than a programming error. I think ultimately there's no defiance from Nemesis. He just does as he's told to and follows the rules. Maybe his constant desire to hunt stars and shake his original programming would be a problem, always tunneling the Jills, you know. Pinhead could be seen as defiant, with him doing very bold acts like teleporting survivors out of the realm during his Mori, and even seemingly leaving the realm too, as of 2025. I do think when it comes to the more powerful characters though, there's generally a greater level of respect on the entity's part, and allowance even to let them do as they please. This I think is the case for the Cenobites, who may even be allowed to come and go as they please. Or hey, it could be defiance, and maybe intentional, as, you know, the Cenobites are into punishment and pain, so maybe they get a bit of a kick out of being naughty. What? Artist is a character who you would assume would be defiant. However, we rarely see this from her, or any sign that she is defiant. I think it's because she's been so broken and whittled down over the years by the entity and its manipulation. At this point, she has reserved to the fact that she isn't going to be free, and this is her life now. She's also distorted far beyond who she was. And so it's that question again of if she even remembers. She may hate what she's doing, but much like Wraith for example, she may also realize there's nothing she can do about it. Sadako is another character who's overwhelmed with rage and so likely isn't that concerned with defiance. In fact, she seems to have a very good relationship with the entity as it saved her from the well, the two of them having this rather beautiful moment of connection actually, and so Sadako seems to have no reason to rebel. She's actually quite thankful toward the entity for saving her. Dredge does seem to do something rather defiant, similar to how Huntress appears to cut off the entity's connection when she receives Undetectable. This would suggest that the Dredge is doing the same when activating Nightfall, with it blanketing the entire trial in darkness. This could quite literally be cutting off the entity's vision too, from the perspective of the crows as well, or out from the killer's eyes, as it's so dark. Dredge also consumed Maurice upon entering the trials, taking him directly from Father Campbell's chapel, with him only being returned over a month later. This seems pretty defiant, especially as the entity appears to favour Maurice quite a bit, giving him that third eye when he gets burnt entering the realm. Dredge is also theorised more generally to pose a threat to the entity due to its similar qualities to it, with it also being made up of a dark fog and consuming things. It's theorised Dredge may be a smaller version of the entity or even a broken off part of it. Dredge also pretty willy-nilly it consumes survivors during its mori. It just straight up consumes them into it. Where are they going after that? Dredge is a bit of a rogue agent basically, it seems. Wesker is placated quite a lot by the entity, with him being provided all he could want with the perfected Ouroboros serum, but further boosting his ego too. Yet Wesker doesn't seem happy still. He rebels by pushing the experiments he does even further, utilizing the blighted serum and injecting himself with it, possibly doing so as he may want to one day try and overthrow the entity. Good luck with that, Wesker. Other than this, he does seem relatively lacking in defiance though. His ego is placated, so he's fine. Knight, I would say, doesn't show any signs of rebellion, and he seems to generally enjoy the realm and appreciate how the entity let him take his boys along with him too, so I'd say Knight hasn't been defiant at all really. Another one of those cases. Skull Merchant is pretty similar. She seems quite happy in the trials, and there's nothing she does seemingly to rebel directly against the entity or its rules. She just goes along with it really, and there's more signs she gets along with it than goes against it, I'd say. Singularity I could see being somewhat defiant, seeing as he is being captured in a sense in the realm after just getting sentience and freedom. I think he would kind of hate that, but equally he gets to eternally punish humanity here and use their genes as he pleases. It's tough and there's no direct note of his defiance, so I'll say he's probably not really. Xenomorph I think probably has been somewhat defiant, as it's not really in their nature to comply, and it's not a Demogorgon situation where it's part of a hive mind, therefore it's controlling a literal creature. I do like the theory that the Xenos only follow the trial rules, as the entity also took the Xeno Queen, putting them at threat of extinction, so possibly they are quietly defiant, but not overtly. Chucky is another character who professes that he loves this place, and so he doesn't really have a reason for defiance either, nor is there a perk or anything really that suggests it. He's happy going about his business being an evil deviant. I could see him maybe being defiant in a similar way to Ghostface, just sort of like messing around a bit too much, maybe not following the rules when he's feeling like it because he wants to do his own thing, but that kind of thing I imagine is somewhat encouraged by the entity anyway, because it's emotion it wants at the end of the day, so as long as it does that, I think it's probably fine with it. Unknown is seemingly quite openly defiant from the get-go, with it even struggling against the entity when it gets taken in the lore. I think the only killer we get direct note of doing this actually. Most are tempted into the fog by something or willingly enter it, but Unknown is straight up fighting against the entity's claws as it's pulled into the realm. There's also a number of quotes like, "I will not be denied my happiness," that sound quite sincere and potentially come truly from Unknown, the creature. A creature who wants nothing more than to be free. It is quite restricted in the realm too, I suppose, as it cannot evolve as freely as it used to, altering itself to adapt to the stories around it. In the realm it has a fixed image, and so its powers likely wane to some level because of this. Unknown surely wants to escape someday. Vecna is maybe our most defiant character, as from the get-go there is no doubt about what he wants. He wants to study the power and realm of the entity, and then one day overthrow it. He basically says as much to the entity in fact, or at least he's very explicit about it, just outright stating he'll play his role for now, just in the lobby, and that type of thing. Vecna is the only canonical killer we know of to receive the special Mark of Negation from the entity, or Mark of the Entity as it's called too. A mark that signifies a significant nerfing down and restriction of a killer's powers and abilities. In this case, Vecna is restricted to basic spells, when he should really be capable of much more. This does suggest that unlike the other killers who the entity is able to directly nerf, for Vecna it had to find a different solution, or potentially a more robust one. Dracula is a killer that I think is definitely placated by the entity, possibly out of some level of fear of what he's capable of, or potentially just out of respect. Dracula is the only killer in the game who gets to bring along his whole house to the trials, which you can see looming over every trial too. Dracula also has some voice lines that seem to suggest his like of the place. And I think generally just that he gets to kill humans on repeat is pretty enjoyable for him. So yeah, I don't think he's defiant. Maybe he would get defiant when he gets bored though. Houndmaster also seems to just enjoy the realm and has a real hatred for the survivors, who she personally insults and singles out for their insecurities or weaknesses. Lovely. She doesn't seem defiant to the entity really and seems to get a decent kick out of the realm. Kaneki, I imagine, would be more defiant if he wasn't persistently hungry for flesh, with him seeming to be forever in a state of torment, whining and moaning. Poor guy. He certainly can't like what he's doing here, or agree with it, but I think due to the state he's in, he's also got no capacity to fight back, as the entity clearly starves him to some level, outside of the trials especially. I think he would be defiant if he could though, for sure. Springtrap also seems to just be having a good time, and even willingly entered the realm to come here, seeing its potential. Therefore I doubt he's that defiant against the entity, and likely instead just appreciates the opportunity the realm brings. It's endless victims, and he gets to be the fun one and play around with the survivors. What's not to like for him? Krasue is much the same. I think Burong in many ways is too far gone now, and so the Krasue has largely taken over, and all the Krasue desires is death and to feed, which it gets eternally in the realm. Therefore the both of them are ultimately placated. I could see Burong being less approving though if she were more aware, as she no longer gets to perform to anyone really here, she's just trapped with no audience. Vecna or Henry has also not shown any clear sign of defiance, but likely instead agreement with the entity, with it also previously taking a Demogorgon. I think this signals that the two are actually on good terms, and there's no defiance from Vecna. Vecna also gets to eternally hunt down 11, a person he largely hates, along with the rebellious cast of Stranger Things characters. I could see him being rather content with this, at least for a time. Maybe one day he'd get bored and want to realize his original goals. Maybe then he would rebel. But for now, I would say he's happy and on pretty similar terms with the entity. Maybe even having more of a mutual agreement and understanding between them. A mutual respect. Alright, well, that's gonna do it. I do hope you enjoyed. Let me know your thoughts as always down below. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.